It is that time of the year, guys. You know what this represents right here? This is your preseason rankings. It is time to throw those rankings out, crumble them up, and throw them out the window because none of the preseason stuff matters. There's too many injuries and too many disappointments in fantasy to really consider preseason rankings viable anymore. So we're going through the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 3 fantasy football, and I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 3. So please go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, getting into our first tier of guys right here, I've got Puka Nacua at number 1 and CeeDee Lamb at number 2. So as you can see, this first tier already looks a lot differently because it's excluding 2 particular players that we will go through here soon. But with Puka Nacua, I mean, this is your prototypical number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football right now. He's clearly the most important wide receiver in a pass-heavy offense with a really good quarterback, and this guy is getting targeted like crazy right now. So against the Philadelphia Eagles, who just stopped the Kansas City Chiefs for the most part, because Kansas City didn't have a wide receiver 1 like Puka Nacua, I don't think matchup matters. And on top of that, the Los Angeles Rams are the team that gave the Philadelphia Eagles the most trouble last year. And the Eagles still look really good this year, and they've already been given work by both the Cowboys and the Chiefs. I expect the Rams to play a really good game and Puka Nacua to finish as our wide receiver 1. CeeDee Lamb at number 2 at the Chicago Bears. Listen, I know CeeDee Lamb has not broken off for a big touchdown or anything like that, but you have to acknowledge several things. If you go to FS Roundup and just look at the numbers that he has been putting up the past 2 weeks, these are true wide receiver, high-end wide receiver 1 numbers in fantasy football. The amount of routes run, the amount of snaps he's in on, the amount of targets he's getting on a per-game basis, 200-yard games. This guy will break off one of these days, and it could very well be against Chicago with their weakened defense at this point. And number 3 to round out this tier is Amon-Ra St. Brown at the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I will tell you this. Amon-Ra St. Brown obviously was fantastic last week. And I have been saying that I believe that this Detroit offensive coordinator, John Morton, is going to I think Amon-Ra is going to highly benefit from a new change at offensive coordinator because I don't think he'll be able to utilize all the same pieces. Well, obviously last week, everybody ate in that Detroit offense, and this is a great matchup. But of course, you have to understand in fantasy, it's hard to replicate a game like that. He just put up a 40-burger, basically, in a full PPR format. Really hard to replicate that stuff, but I still do think in this high-flying matchup right here at Baltimore, it could be one of those games again. Now, drop it down to our next tier. I've got Nico Collins one spot over Jamar Chase at 4 and 5. Now, with Nico Collins, before the Monday night game, where they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I actually had Nico Collins inside tier 1. And I think he's great. If you watched that game last night, he made an excellent, tremendous catch in the end zone for a touchdown. But if you watched after what happened after that, he was basically a no-show for the majority of it. And it was not even just his fault, right? Nico Collins was getting off-target throws from CJ Stroud, or he just wasn't that involved moving forward. Nico Collins is in a position right now to where this offense in Houston, it's starting to really worry me. This offensive line, they can't protect CJ Stroud. They're not also drawing up quick routes to get receivers open really fast. So Nico Collins, I think this could be one of those rebound games against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. But at the same time, I struggle to see what kind of offensive potential that Houston's offense has right now. So for that reason, Nico is not in tier 1 right now. And Jamar Chase at the Minnesota Vikings. Listen, obviously this is the biggest fantasy news we've seen yet in 2025. Joe Burrow may very well not play again in 2025. And a lot of people would think that, Jamar Chase's upside is significantly cut. And of course it is cut to a certain degree. But I will be willing to venture here. Jamar Chase still salvages a good fantasy season without Joe Burrow. And I think it starts this week, even at the Minnesota Vikings, a tougher defense. Listen, Jake Browning is a very functional backup. And if you watched what Jamar did last week, well, the majority of it wasn't with Burrow. 1 touchdown catch with Burrow. The majority of it came afterwards where Burrow was out, and it was Jake Browning. So I think Jamar Chase is going to be fine in fantasy football moving forward, and I think this week people will see that at the Minnesota Vikings. But of course, without Burrow, his upside does get cut a little bit. Malik Nabers at 6 and Drake London at 7. Listen, Malik Nabers versus the Chiefs. Last week he was great versus the Dallas Cowboys defense. But I got to be honest here. Only because I don't trust the guys after him in this tier, is Malik Neighbors this high at 6. I do think this is a tough matchup. He will be taking on Trent McDuffie as that corner this week, and he is one of those corners that you have to consider in fantasy football. He will be following Malik Neighbors all game long. And as talented as Malik Neighbors is, that's the reason he's at 6. I don't think that Russ is going to replicate that or even come close to it in week 3 versus Kansas City, but you do obviously have to acknowledge that Malik Neighbors is a top-tier talent in this league, and he should not go on your bench in fantasy. Drake London at 7. Listen, Drake London at the Carolina Panthers is a tremendous matchup, and I get it. Last week, it wasn't just bad. Like, he had that fumble to lose 2 points, but he was just not that important to the offensive game plan. And maybe one can speculate, was it the injury? Is it really actually affecting him more than a lot of people might think? That's very possible. I think it's possible that that is the case. But I will say that Drake London is clearly the wide receiver 1 still. And I actually think that Michael Penix is a really good quarterback. So I think we have seen not yet the best from Drake London, and the best is yet to come with Drake London in this Atlanta offense. And this week at Carolina could be a jumpstart week. And Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka at 8 and 9 to round out this tier. Listen, I still don't know what the hierarchy truly is in Tampa. Like, as far as targets go, Mike is still the preferred number 1 read in this offense. But the past 2 weeks, Mike Evans has dealt with really good cornerback play. So I do believe that Mike Evans against the New York Jets actually gets a little bit of a break. I talk about corners a lot and how they impact fantasy wide receiver 1s. Listen, Sauce Gardner is a popular corner in the league. He's not one of the best cover corners. He's just not. So I don't think Mike is dealing with that tough of a matchup. But let's say that Mike Evans does get slowed down by Sauce. Well, Emeka Egbuka is going to continue to shine. I mean, he got in the end zone on Monday night. He dropped 1 pass, but this guy is going to come back ready to work against the New York Jets defense. It's an opportunity that I want a part of, and I think Emeka Egbuka is still right up there with upside with Mike Evans in this Tampa offense, led by a really good quarterback, by the way, with Baker Mayfield. Now, again, to me, I am still going to pick Mike Evans most times over Emeka Egbuka if I am dealing with both players. But I will tell you this, if you are not certain about this one, you can go to fsroundup.com right now, and you can actually start a poll on any particular player, and you can actually vote on other people's polls as well. So let's go ahead and do it right now. Let's go ahead and make an Emeka Egbuka versus a Mike Evans poll. Go type in Emeka Egbuka at the Stats Roundup page on fsroundup.com. Go to the chat right here and then click start a poll. And you'll see the polls offer you a who I should start option. And you can pick week 3 and then you can add Mike Evans to this as well. And then let's go ahead and create this poll and see what happens here. Because in all seriousness, I'm very curious where the community stands on this one. And if you want access to the automatic waiver wire tool that will save teams this year, that is part of the premium subscription package. The polling is free, but the automatic waiver wire is part of the premium subscription tier. And it's well worth it because the last thing you want to do is end up looking like a guy like this.
This is Ted. Look at him. Ted desperately needs to pick up a new running back, or his fantasy team is toast for the 3rd year in a row. Don't be Ted. Use Fantasy Football Roundup to automate your waiver pickups and rest easy this season. Huh. Look at him.
Now, dropping down to our next tier, I've got Jackson Smith-Njigba at number 10, and Justin Jefferson lands at 11. That's one to talk about right there. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, this guy is a CeeDee Lamb light in Seattle's offense, if you want to know the truth. Like, this guy has produced tons of points so far in a full PPR format. Now, in a half PPR format, it hasn't been as fruitful because he hasn't gotten the end zone yet. Versus New Orleans, that could change in an instant. But until I see him start to get used more in the red zone, more down the field with deep targets, I'm going to not have him ranked inside probably the first 2 tiers, but I do still think the potential is very much there, and we know that this guy is going to get targeted like crazy. And then Justin Jefferson at 11, he's taking on the Bengals defense, which in theory is a great matchup. But guys, listen, even though J.J. McCarthy is going to miss this game, and I have said this all year, J.J. McCarthy's just not that good. Is that becoming more clear to everybody by now? he is not providing Justin Jefferson the amount of upside that he can bring us in fantasy with a good quarterback. Now, I don't think Carson Wentz is going to do the same either. That's why Justin Jefferson is at 11 when he, reality-wise, should be top 5, top 3 with a really good quarterback. But this has been my problem with Justin Jefferson all season long. He has not good quarterback play. And that's a problem that we're starting to see evolve right now with people who are disappointed they took Justin Jefferson inside the first 6 or 7 picks. I think Justin Jefferson is in a tough spot this week, even against a really good matchup with a bad quarterback. Rome Odunze at 12. This guy was freaking awesome on Sunday. He was the lone bright spot, a part of Chicago's offense, and he gets to play the Dallas defense, who just gave up 450 yards through the air to Russell Wilson. Yes, I want a part of this matchup. And this is something I've been talking about for weeks now. If you just looked at the usage on FS Roundup of these players, Rome Odunze was more of the downfield target than DJ Moore was. This is important to keep in mind because this guy was excellent in week 2. And I think it continues because the usage is completely there with this player right here. And Zay Flowers at 13 to round out this tier. I discussed this with Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is a matchup you want pieces in on. And Zay Flowers, what was really encouraging to me last week is that I knew we weren't going to see Zay Flowers of week 1 in week 2 when they played the Cleveland Browns because they were going to dismantle the Browns. But I will say this, Zay Flowers was clearly the lead target in this Baltimore offense. Not just the wide receiver 1. He obviously is the wide receiver 1, and he's been that for years. This guy was the clear lead target, meaning that he was more important than Mark Andrews and more important than Isaiah Likely, who isn't back yet, but I don't think is going to change. Zay Flowers is a legitimate breakout wide receiver in fantasy this year. Like, it's becoming very clear to me. So, of course, you want that in your lineup anyways, but you definitely want him in your matchup versus Detroit this week. Dropping down to our next tier is Deebo Samuel at 14 and Tet McMillan at 15. Now, Deebo Samuel is playing the Las Vegas Raiders at home in Washington, and the only thing that can stop him is if Jaden Daniels misses this game, and apparently that is up for debate, whether Jaden Daniels plays or not. Now, given that they are coming off a long week, I'm kind of expecting Jaden Daniels to play. I really do think that he will end up playing in this game, considering the fact that they basically have a mini bye week since they played last Thursday night. So I do think that with Deebo Samuel and Jaden Daniels, Deebo has like top tier upside. This is a legitimate like wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy right now. And it's clear that they're using this guy like they did in San Francisco when he had all that success. So yes, I'm going to continue to have Deebo really well ranked in these rankings. Tet McMillan at 15. Listen, on one hand, we've got a true wide receiver 1 in an NFL offense. We've got this guy having basically 10 targets per game, and the only thing that stopped him from having a better fantasy day than Hunter Renfrow was 2 touchdowns. I mean, Hunter Renfrow really didn't have that many yards, but he definitely got in the end zone 2 times, and Tet didn't. So versus Atlanta's defense, this is a matchup I think can be taken advantage of this week because they may be missing their star corner this week. A.J. Terrell might be out. I think Tet McMillan is just in an offense I don't think is very good, but at the same time, I know Tet McMillan is definitely going to be a guy that continues to see 8+ targets on a weekly basis. Davante Adams at 16 and Courtland Sutton at 17. With Davante Adams, again, this matchup I do want pieces in on, and I do think that it was really exciting to see Davante Adams kind of look like his old self in week 2. I do also think that Davante Adams still needs to be taken into account as the wide receiver 2, clearly in this offense behind Puka Nacua. So his upside is always going to be capped. But I will say at the same time, he definitely is a great red zone threat. And in a matchup versus Philly where it could be relatively high scoring or relatively low scoring, I still want in on this matchup, and I will put Davante at 16. But I'm putting Courtland Sutton at 17 here for a couple of different reasons. Number one is that Courtland Sutton is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Do not worry about Troy Franklin. I do think Troy Franklin is relevant in fantasy football, now more than he's ever been. But I will say that Courtland Sutton, what we saw last week, that's typical. They sometimes do not go his way, and he can disappear. But then a lot of times he's going to put up weeks like week 1 where he gets in the end zone because he's a great red zone threat. And number 2 reason is because Courtland Sutton has a history of doing really well against the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm not saying that he's going to come out here and light the world on fire, but I am saying that I think he's going to be a good option this week because of the offense and Bo Nix looking better and his history against the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Ladd McConkey in that same matchup at 18 and A.J. Brown at 19. A.J. Brown is down bad, and honestly, this might be too high for him. But we'll go through Ladd first because I do think that Ladd, it's going to be tough to see what they're going to do this week. Obviously, Keenan Allen is very involved in this offense. He is lowering Ladd's upside alone. Quentin Johnston also is lowering Ladd's upside because the problem with Ladd is that a lot of downfield targets that he would have gotten last year, they're being taken by Quentin Johnston. And also, a lot of third down, fourth down throws that were Ladd McConkey's last year, they're getting taken by Keenan Allen. They're still having him plenty involved. And based on numbers, he still is their wide receiver one. But I will tell you this, Ladd McConkey is in this position to where I have no idea how often that Pat Surtain will follow him. I really don't know. So he could be blanketed all game, and this could be way too high, or he could be working out a slot a lot, and they end up putting Johnston on Courtland Sutton. It could be one of those either way matchups, but I do think Ladd is still important enough on a really good passing offense to where it may not matter quite as much. A.J. Brown at 19. This guy is down bad. I mean, really, the crazy part about it is that he was actually pretty hyper-targeted last week, and he still didn't do anything. And I think there's a couple things that work. Number one, A.J. Brown is clearly unhappy. Like, it's very clear at this point. And to everybody who tells me he's not, just look at his own words. And number two, Jalen Hurts just isn't pushing the ball down the field that much. It's just not happening. So I don't see the massive upside with AJ yet. And at this point, I'm not sure I can rank him inside the top 15 until I see anything different in this offense. A.J. Brown's at number 19, and this is a very generous ranking against a really good defense versus the Los Angeles Rams. Brian Thomas Jr. at 20 and Xavier Worthy at 21 to round out this tier. So both of these guys are dealing with a questionable tag this week. Brian Thomas Jr. had a disaster game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. He had plenty of opportunities. He just did not execute on any of them. Brian Thomas Jr. was dealing apparently with a wrist injury that was hindering him. So I don't know if he's playing in this game or if he's not going to, but based on the fact that he played through it, I would imagine he does play. But this matchup, either way, it's not good. Derek Stingley is one of those corners you have to take into account. Versus Houston this week, I think it's a really tough matchup for Brian Thomas Jr., so I am not in this position where I feel like he's that good of a play this week. And based on his play this year, it just hasn't looked very good. And while I do think he's a buy low candidate, I'm not ready to put him back inside my top 15 just yet. And Xavier Worthy at the New York Giants is at 21. Now, Xavier Worthy, we got news leading into the Philadelphia game that apparently he might be good to go versus the New York Giants this week, which would be a game changer for Pat Mahomes and this Kansas City offense. Because obviously we haven't seen it yet because he was taken out of the game so early by his own dumb teammate Travis Kelce. But Xavier Worthy does have plenty of upside in this Chiefs offense. They will use him creatively, and they will use him more as a true wide receiver this year than they did in his rookie year. I do think Xavier Worthy, if he plays, could be too low, but given the fact he's coming off a shoulder injury, I do still want to have him down here at 21 to hedge my bet against a player that might just not be the same level of upside that he will be in a couple of weeks. Dropping down to our next tier. This is a big tier right here. Calvin Ridley is at 22, and DK Metcalf is at 23. Calvin Ridley, I called him a buy low heading into the week. And I think we start to see the play increase from Calvin Ridley versus Indianapolis this week. Listen, Calvin has had two straight really tough matchups. But one thing is becoming clear. Cam Ward is becoming better. Like, he looked better in week 2 than he did in week 1. And number 2 is that Calvin Ridley, of course, is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So I do think that Calvin Ridley just takes another step this week against an easier defense. This is the easiest defense he will play through the first 3 weeks. I think this is a break in schedule right here to where we could see legitimate good upside this week from Calvin Ridley. DK Metcalf is back at 23. At the New England Patriots, I was really disappointed with the Steelers' offense versus the Seattle Seahawks. Listen, I knew the Steelers' offense would be hot and cold, but at the same time, I just figured versus the Seattle Seahawks, they would force feed him the ball. They really didn't. And I will tell you this, When he was given opportunities, he dropped 2 passes. DK didn't look very good. He caught the touchdown to salvage the week, but this guy was not exactly catching every ball that was given to him. I think DK Metcalf is a problem to a certain extent, and I just don't think he's the same player that everybody thought he was several years ago when he was with Seattle. So even against a softer New England defense that has become really soft, I'm not going to have him ranked inside my top 20 this week. Jacoby Myers is at 24, and Terry McLaurin is at 25. Listen, Geno Smith looked bad on Monday night versus the Chargers. If you didn't watch that game because it was super late, I'll tell you this. Geno Smith looked terrible, but I will also tell you this. Jacoby Myers was the clear wide receiver 1. On top of that, Brock Bowers was clearly not fully healthy. So they were not using him as a true wide receiver threat the majority of the game. He was more of a decoy out there on Monday night. Jacoby Myers was still clearly the wide receiver 1. So I think that Jacoby Myers belongs in this tier because he is a wide receiver 1 with a solid quarterback for fantasy purposes. And I think Washington, the matchup this week, is much better than the one they got versus the Chargers. And Terry McLaurin at 25. Listen, versus the Las Vegas Raiders, again, it all hinges on Jaden Daniels. If he has Jaden, he's going to be better this week than he was last week. It's a slow improvement that we'll see from Terry McLaurin each and every week. But at the same time, the level of wide receiver production we're getting this year in fantasy so far warrants him to be down the slope because he hasn't been any good yet. And I do think with Debo there, it just lowers his upside because there's not as many downfield chucks as there was last year. They've got a legitimate guy who works really well in short yardage and space situations. So Terry McLaurin, I think his upside is just lower this year. But I will say that with Jaden Daniels and this matchup versus the Las Vegas Raiders, it has upside for him to have a breakout game in 2025. Garrett Wilson's at 26 and Keenan Allen is at 27. Garrett Wilson at Tampa Bay. Last week we saw it, right? Garrett Wilson is attached to a quarterback that's just not very good. And I said this leading into the week, and I was getting, people were fighting me about it. It was bizarre, but I think it's clear now because I don't hear anybody trying to argue with me anymore. But the one thing that Garrett Wilson will continue to get is peppered with targets. And Tampa Bay's defense is very beatable. So I do think that this matchup is better for Garrett Wilson and the New York Jets this week. But if Justin Fields doesn't play, who knows what's going to happen. Keenan Allen is at 27 versus the Denver Broncos. A couple things are very clear to this point. Number one is that Keenan Allen, while he's not the same player, he has that same chemistry with Justin Herbert, which is some of the strongest in the league, I would argue. Number two is that Keenan Allen versus Denver will not be the guy who is being guarded by Pat Surtain. While I do think Denver's defense is really good outside of Pat Surtain too, Pat Surtain no doubt is going to limit the upside of whoever he is guarding in week 3. But I will say Keenan Allen won't be that guy. So I think Keenan Allen, at this point, what we've seen from him target-wise, and if you look at FS Roundup, what his usage is, he's involved enough with Justin Herbert having a great year so far for him to be inside the top 30 at this point. And then to round out this tier at 28 is Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers versus the Arizona Cardinals. Turns out it wasn't Ricky Pearsall who was getting hyper-targeted by Mac Jones. It was Juwan Jennings. He got 10 targets in this game. It was awesome to watch for Juwan Jennings' upside in fantasy football. Do I think it's definitely going to continue? No, because that's why I put him at 28. But I will say Mac Jones is good enough to provide solid upside for his wide receivers in fantasy. I continue to be wrong about him, so I'm not going to doubt him again. I think versus Arizona, it's an opportunistic matchup. And Juwan Jennings, if he sees the same target share as last week, this is too low of a ranking. And then drop it down to our last tier, our final two guys, Marvin Harrison Jr. and George Pickens. Listen, I was on a hot and cold roller coaster with Marvin leading into last week. I thought there was a chance that Marvin was underranked, and then I ranked him a little bit higher, and he ended up doing nothing. Marvin is just flat out in an offense that doesn't throw the ball enough to their leading wide receiver. And that's not going to change with Kyler Murray. It's just not going to change. So yes, his upside is limited, but I will say Marvin is definitely a guy that can execute on limited targets. He looks good so far this year on his opportunities. I will say that. So Marvin is still going to find himself in the top 30. But this week, I'm very discouraged by what we saw last week and the target share that he got. And just the opportunities that he got were just not good enough. And then George Pickens at 30. This may be too low of a ranking for some people. At Chicago, I think this is an opportunistic matchup. But George Pickens is still not in a position to where he's getting enough work for me to put him much higher than this, especially over a wide receiver 1 on his own team. And I do think Pickens does look really good this year, but I'm not there with him yet as far as him being a top 20 option. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top buy low candidates before week 3, click on this video right here.